I've always believed that life, much like art, reveals itself in layers. A single brushstroke means nothing until you step back and see how it blends with the rest. I should have noticed the first stroke of deceit much earlier. Elena was an art piece herself, complex, captivating, with shadows hidden beneath her vibrant colors. We met in the soft glow of gallery lights, where every whispered word felt like poetry. I thought I'd found my masterpiece. But even masterpieces crack over time. It started subtly. A perfume she never wore before lingering on her scarf. A laugh softer, reserved for someone else. She became a ghost in our home, her eyes tracing invisible lines I couldn't see. Conversations grew hollow, filled with casual words masking deeper meanings. I told myself it was stress, boredom, routine. But my mind kept circling back, trying to fill the empty spaces her absence left behind. And then there were her late meetings, her sudden interest in private collections she never mentioned before. One night, as she slept beside me, her breathing steady, I stared at the ceiling, realizing I wasn't trying to find the truth. I was afraid of it. But fear is a fragile thing, easily shattered. The next morning, I decided to stop looking at the surface. It was time to peel back the layers. I started with the simple things, patterns, habits, routines. Elena was predictable once, like the rhythm of waves. But now there were ripples where the water used to be calm. Her phone was the obvious place to start, but Elena was cautious. Locked screens, quick swipes when I entered the room, laughter that faded the moment I was near. She underestimated me, though. She thought I'd drown in suspicion without ever learning to swim. Instead of prying, I observed. She had a gallery opening downtown, one she claimed would run late. I knew the place. A modern maze of glass and light, easy to get lost in. Perfect for secrets. I arrived unannounced, staying in the shadows, unnoticed. She was there, radiant as always, but her attention wasn't on the art. It was on him, a man I'd never seen before, dressed too sharp for someone pretending to be casual. Their body language was louder than any words could be. Small touches, lingering glances, proximity that spoke of familiarity. I didn't confront her. Not yet. Rage is like fire. It burns too quickly if you feed it all at once. I needed it to simmer, to mold into something sharper. When she came home later, her face painted with practiced exhaustion, she kissed me with the same lips that whispered to someone else hours before. I smiled back, feeling the hollow echo in my chest. I knew now, but knowing wasn't enough. It was time to plan. After that night, I became an artist of my own, sketching lines of deceit with precision, gathering details like strokes on a canvas. Each lie she told added another layer. Each glance she shared with him another shade of betrayal. I followed her discreetly, not every time, just enough to confirm patterns. She met him in places that pretended to be private, dim cafes, art studios, and once, a hotel tucked between two towering buildings. A temporary haven where she shed not just her clothes but the life we'd built together. But this wasn't just about infidelity. It felt orchestrated, deliberate, as if I were part of some exhibition I didn't consent to. They weren't just reckless lovers. They were careful, selective, too careful. Curiosity turned into obsession. I dug deeper, not just into her current life but her past. Her emails, her hidden folders, the parts of her digital world she thought were safe. That's when I found it. A collection of messages, coded in a language of inside jokes and references I didn't recognize. But the patterns were clear. He wasn't just a stranger. He was connected to our world. An investor, an art collector, someone who'd been around longer than I'd realized. Their affair wasn't spontaneous. It had history, roots intertwined with our life. But the most painful discovery wasn't the betrayal itself. It was realizing she respected him enough to be careful, to protect their secret. With me, she grew careless. She thought I'd never notice. That's when the idea took shape, not just to expose them, but to make them feel it. The emptiness, the humiliation, the loss. I wouldn't confront her with words. I'd create something she couldn't ignore. A masterpiece of revenge. Revenge isn't a sudden burst of rage. It's a craft, meticulous and patient, like restoring a damaged painting. Every detail matters. I didn't want to just catch them. I wanted to unravel them, to watch their world collapse, one thread at a time. Elena loved control. In her work, in her image, in me. She believed herself the curator of our lives, arranging emotions like framed pieces on a gallery wall. That was her weakness, her need to manage every perception, every illusion. So I started with subtle shifts. I became distant, but not enough to raise suspicion. I still smiled, still kissed her goodbye, still asked about her day. But beneath that mask, I was dismantling the foundation of our life together. I created a new identity, one she'd never connect to me. Using an alias, I reached out to her lover under the guise of an art investor with deep pockets and an interest in his work. He responded quickly, eager, blinded by ambition. We arranged meetings, discussed exhibitions, potential partnerships. I fed his ego, dangling opportunities like bait, each interaction a carefully placed trap. At the same time, I documented everything.
Photos, messages, recording.
Not for confrontation, but for the grand finale I was meticulously planning. A public unveiling of their private disgrace. But the masterpiece required more than evidence. It needed an audience. And soon I'd have one. Because nothing cuts deeper than a betrayal displayed for the world to see. The idea crystallized one evening as I stood in our shared living room, staring at a large, abstract painting Elena adored. To her, it was a masterpiece, complex, chaotic, yet meaningful. To me, it was just colors splattered over lies. I decided to create an exhibit, a real one. A private gallery event under the guise of celebrating new contemporary art. Through my fabricated investor persona, I secured a venue, pulled a few strings with industry contacts, and sent out exclusive invitations. Elena's lover was on the top of the list, alongside art critics, collectors, and, most importantly, Elena herself. She'd be too intrigued to resist, especially since it tied directly to her lover's big break. Meanwhile, I kept playing the devoted husband. I listened to her stories about her busy days, nodded along to her lies, and even suggested she deserved a little getaway to relax from all the stress. She smiled, oblivious, not realizing she was walking straight into the frame I designed. The days leading up to the event felt surreal. I'd watch her getting ready, carefully applying makeup, choosing dresses, unaware that soon, no mask would be enough to cover her truth. On the day of the exhibit, I arrived early to oversee the final touches. The gallery was pristine, white walls, soft lighting, the perfect stage. But unlike other exhibits, the art wasn't on the walls. It was hidden in plain sight, screens disguised as modern installations, recordings embedded within seemingly abstract visuals, fragments of their affair woven into the very fabric of the event. Messages, photos, videos, each piece curated with precision. A silent narrative waiting to be revealed. And tonight, under the glow of gallery lights, their masterpiece would be unveiled. Not on canvas, but in ruin. The gallery buzzed with anticipation, filled with the hum of polite conversations and the clinking of champagne glasses. Faces I'd known for years moved through the space, oblivious to the trap laid beneath the veneer of sophistication. Elena arrived fashionably late, as always, her presence commanding attention. She wore a sleek black dress, her hair perfectly styled, her confidence radiating like the glow of the spotlights. She kissed me on the cheek, her lips a cold brush against my skin. I smiled back, steady and composed, my pulse a slow drumbeat beneath the surface. Her lover arrived moments later, equally polished, his charm effortless. They exchanged subtle glances, thinking no one noticed. But I did. I saw everything. The exhibit was arranged to lead them and everyone else through a journey. The first installations were abstract, meaningless distractions to set the mood. But as guests moved deeper into the gallery, the pieces grew more personal. Unfamiliar to them, but intimate to me. A photograph of a cafe table, empty coffee cups, a scarf draped over a chair. Just an ordinary image to most, but I knew it was the place where they first met. A framed print of blurred text, artistic to the untrained eye. But if you looked closer, You'd see their messages hidden within. I miss you already. Last night was perfect. Guests admired the art, not yet realizing the story it told. Elena's laughter echoed softly, her obliviousness almost poetic. Then came the final room. A single large screen. Minimalist. Elegant. The centerpiece of the evening. I stood near the entrance, watching as Elena and her lover entered with the crowd. Their curiosity piqued. The lights dimmed. A hush fell over the room. And then it began. A montage of their affair unfolded, discreetly at first. Shadows, reflections, snippets of conversations. Faces blurred just enough to create doubt. But as the sequence progressed, the clarity sharpened.
A familiar laugh.
A distinct gesture. A kiss captured in the reflection of a window. Whispers rippled through the crowd. Faces turned toward Elena, then back to the screen. Her smile faded, replaced by confusion, then horror as realization set in. Her lover stiffened, his face pale beneath the soft gallery lights. I watched them crumble in real time, their disgrace immortalized in the very medium they cherished, art. And as the final image faded, a photo of our wedding rings resting on a cracked surface, I stepped forward, my voice calm and clear. Thank you all for coming. I hope you enjoyed the exhibit. It's called The Gallery of Lies, a story of deception, betrayal, and the price of arrogance. I left them standing there, exposed and shattered, surrounded by the wreckage they'd created. And it was beautiful. The silence that followed my words was deafening, heavy with disbelief. Faces blurred past me. Colleagues, friends, strangers, some averting their eyes, others unable to look away from the wreckage of Elena's carefully curated life. She stood frozen, her expression a grotesque masterpiece of shock, shame, and rage all bleeding together. Her lover's face had turned ashen, his charm dissolved, leaving nothing but raw, pathetic fear. I didn't wait for her to speak. There was nothing left to say. I walked out of the gallery, the night air crisp against my skin, each breath tasting like freedom. But freedom is a strange thing, it doesn't always feel the way you expect. It wasn't triumph or satisfaction that filled me. It was emptiness, like finishing a painting only to realize the canvas holds more of you than you wanted to give. When I returned home later, the house felt different, colder, quieter. The shadows seemed to stretch longer, the silence pressing against me like a weight. I poured a drink, sat in the chair by the window, and waited. She arrived just before midnight. The door creaked open, followed by the tentative click of her heels on the wooden floor. She found me in the dark, her figure outlined by the faint glow from the streetlights outside. "Alex!" Her voice was brittle, a fragile thing trying to hold itself together. I didn't respond. I just watched her. She stepped closer, tears streaking down her face, her hands trembling slightly. "I can explain." I laughed, not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. Explain? What part? The lies? The betrayal? Or the fact that you thought you were smarter than me? She flinched, as if the words hit her harder than any slap could. "I made you the centerpiece tonight," I continued softly. "You always wanted to be admired, Elena. Now you are." She collapsed onto the floor, sobbing into her hands, her perfect facade crumbling with every gasp. I didn't comfort her. I simply stood, walked past her, and left her there, alone with the truth she could no longer escape. Because the cruelest revenge isn't exposure. It's making sure they live with it. Days passed, but the echoes of that night lingered like fingerprints on glass. Smudged, unavoidable, impossible to ignore. The story of the exhibit spread quickly through the art world, morphing into whispers behind closed doors, hushed conversations at galleries, and thinly veiled gossip at social events. Elena's reputation crumbled faster than I expected. The woman who once commanded rooms with effortless grace was now a cautionary tale, her name tied not to art, but to scandal. Her lover disappeared from public view, his ambitions buried beneath the rubble of humiliation. But for me, life moved in strange contrast, eerily normal. I returned to work, curated exhibitions, shook hands, exchanged polite smiles. Yet beneath that veneer, I felt detached, as if I'd stepped outside of myself, observing everything from a distance. Elena tried to reach me countless times. Calls, messages, even handwritten letters left at the door. I ignored them all. Her words were just noise now, like echoes in an empty room. One evening, I found her sitting on the front steps of our house, looking like a shadow of the woman I once knew. No makeup, no polished smile, just raw, exposed desperation. "I'm sorry," she whispered as I approached, her voice small against the vastness of her guilt. I stood there, silent, letting the weight of her regret hang between us. "Do you hate me?" she finally asked, her eyes searching mine for something, anything, that resembled the man she once betrayed. "Hate requires effort," I replied calmly. "I'm done putting effort into you." She broke down, her sobs echoing into the night. But I felt nothing.
No anger. No sadness.
Just a void where love used to be. I walked past her without another word, the door closing softly behind me. Because sometimes, the absence of forgiveness is the cruelest punishment of all. The days stretched on, each one quieter than the last. There were no more accusations, no confrontations, just silence. A heavy, oppressive silence that filled every corner of the house, clinging to the walls like dust. Elena stopped coming by after that night. Maybe she finally understood. Or maybe she didn't. It didn't matter. Her absence was as loud as her betrayal had been. But silence has a way of turning inward. I thought I'd feel liberated after exposing her, after unraveling her life the way she unraveled ours. But freedom isn't always clean. Sometimes it's jagged, cutting deeper the more you hold on to it. I kept replaying everything, not the betrayal but the moments before it. The dinners we shared, the late-night talks, the subtle ways she drifted without me noticing. It wasn't nostalgia. It was analysis. I dissected our memories like artifacts, trying to understand where the cracks began. One night, unable to sleep, I found myself in the attic, rummaging through old boxes. Photographs, letters, pieces of a life that now felt foreign. I found a picture of us from years ago, smiling in a way that felt genuine, untouched by deceit. I stared at it for a long time before tearing it in half. Not out of rage, not even out of spite, just to acknowledge that it was gone. Elena sent one final letter weeks later.
No apologies. No justifications.
Just a simple sentence. "I hope you find peace." I burned it without reading further, because peace isn't something you find. It's something you rebuild. And I wasn't there yet. But I would be. Life after destruction is strange. You expect some dramatic shift, a clear line between before and after. But it doesn't work like that. The world doesn't pause for your pain. Morning still arrives, indifferent and bright, whether you're ready or not. I moved out of the house we shared. It wasn't haunted, no ghosts, no echoes of her voice. But the walls felt too familiar, saturated with memories that didn't belong to me anymore. I found a small apartment overlooking the city skyline.
Minimal furniture. Bare walls.
A blank canvas. For the first time in years, I woke up without the weight of pretending. No forced conversations, no rehearsed smiles. Just silence, but this time it was mine. Work became my refuge. I poured myself into curating exhibits, losing hours in galleries, surrounded by art that didn't lie. Paintings don't deceive. They simply exist, flawed, raw, honest in their imperfection. But healing isn't linear. Some days, I felt weightless, untethered from the past. Other days, I'd catch a glimpse of something, a perfume bottle, a specific shade of red, and it would pull me under, sudden and sharp. I didn't try to fight it. I let the memories come, not as wounds, but as lessons. One evening, while sorting through old files for an upcoming exhibit, I stumbled upon a sketch I'd forgotten. A simple drawing of Elena's face, unfinished. I stared at it for a while, tracing the lines with my eyes, not my heart. Then I picked up a pen, not to complete it, but to cross it out. Not with rage, not with regret, just closure. because sometimes the most powerful stroke on a canvas is the one that ends it. Time moved differently now. It wasn't marked by anniversaries or shared traditions. No more our songs, our places, or our stories. Just days blending into nights, punctuated by fleeting moments of clarity and the occasional shadow of her memory sneaking in uninvited. But shadows don't hold power unless you stare at them too long. I filled my life with new routines. Early morning walks through streets I'd never cared to notice before, dinners alone in small cafes where no one knew my name, and late nights spent reading books I'd never finished. There was comfort in the anonymity of it all. Then one evening, as I stood at the edge of a new gallery opening, I saw her.
Elena.
She wasn't with him. She was alone, standing beneath the harsh white lights, her posture different. No longer the effortless elegance she once wore like armor. She looked smaller somehow, not physically, but as if the space around her had grown, swallowing the edges of who she used to be. Our eyes met briefly, just a flicker, a silent acknowledgement. She approached slowly, as if crossing an invisible battlefield. "Alex," she said softly, her voice careful, as though afraid of breaking something fragile between us. I didn't respond immediately. I just studied her. Not the way I used to, with affection or longing, but with curiosity, like observing a painting after it's been restored, seeing the cracks beneath the varnish. "I thought I'd never see you again," she continued, her smile weak, almost rehearsed. I finally spoke, my voice steady. "I wasn't hiding." She laughed quietly, a hollow sound that didn't reach her eyes. "I deserved everything you did. I know that." I nodded slightly, not as forgiveness but as recognition. She did know. That was enough. Before she could say more, I turned to leave. Not out of bitterness, not out of pride, but because there was nothing left to discuss. Some art isn't meant to be revisited. It's meant to be left behind. Leaving her there, under the sterile gallery lights, felt like closing a door without slamming it. There was no satisfaction, no dramatic conclusion. Just an ending as quiet as the betrayal had been loud. But endings have a way of circling back, testing if the wound has truly healed. Months later, I was invited to curate a major exhibition, a collection exploring themes of identity, loss, and transformation. Ironically fitting, I accepted, pouring myself into the work with a focus that bordered on obsession. This wasn't just an exhibit. It was my statement, though no one would know. The opening night arrived, and the gallery pulsed with life. Crowds moving through the space, voices rising and falling like waves. But amidst the noise, I remained anchored, detached yet present. One of the centerpiece installations was something new for me. A mixed-media piece titled Reconstruction. Layers of fragmented photographs, torn canvases, and distorted reflections woven together into something both chaotic and beautiful. To the audience, it was art. To me, it was everything I dismantled and rebuilt. My life, my pain, my freedom. And then I saw her.
Elena.
Again. This time, she didn't approach. She stood at a distance, her gaze fixed on reconstruction. I watched her from across the room as she traced the piece with her eyes, her face unreadable. Maybe she recognized the fragments hidden within it, familiar shapes buried under layers of new meaning. Maybe she didn't, but it didn't matter, because the art wasn't for her. It was for me. For the first time, I realized I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I turned it into something else, something unrecognizable, unbound by memory or regret. As she finally walked away, disappearing into the crowd, I felt nothing.
No anger. No sadness.
Just peace. True peace. And that was the masterpiece. In the weeks that followed the exhibition, life settled into a rhythm. A quiet, unassuming pulse that no longer carried echoes of her name. The exhibit was a success, praised by critics, admired by strangers. But for me, it wasn't the accolades that mattered. It was the absence of weight, of bitterness, of her. I often returned to the gallery after hours, walking through the empty halls, letting the silence fill the spaces where noise once lived. There's something sacred about solitude, about standing among creations that hold pieces of you without asking for anything in return. But healing isn't about forgetting. It's about remembering without breaking. One night, while locking up, I found an envelope slipped beneath the door. Simple, unmarked. Inside was a single photograph. Not of us, not of her. Just an empty chair in front of a window, bathed in the soft glow of morning light. On the back, a note in her handwriting. Some art isn't meant to be revisited, but I hope you find what's next. There was no signature. None needed. I stared at it for a long time, not out of sentiment but curiosity. She wasn't reaching out for forgiveness. She wasn't asking for anything. It was just acknowledgement, a silent nod across a chasm we both created. I didn't keep the photo. I left it on a park bench the next day, letting the wind decide where it would go. Because not all fragments are meant to be carried. Some are meant to be left behind. Life, I realized, isn't about filling every space. Sometimes the emptiest frames tell the most powerful stories. Months passed, and the sharp edges of the past dulled into faint outlines. Ghosts that no longer haunted, just flickered occasionally in the corners of memory. My days were quieter, but not hollow. There was a strange beauty in simplicity. Morning coffee without the weight of another presence. Evenings filled with books. The soft hum of city lights outside my window. I started a new project, one different from anything I'd done before. It wasn't about art or exhibitions. It was personal, a series of blank canvases framed and displayed just as they were.
No colors, no estroques.
Just emptiness, framed as if it were something to be admired. At the opening, people gathered, confused at first, then intrigued. They searched for meaning in the absence, projecting their interpretations onto nothingness. Some found it profound. Others found it pointless. But for me, it was neither. It was just honest. After the crowd thinned, I stood alone in front of one of the empty frames. I didn't think of her. I didn't think of him. I didn't think of us. I just stood there, facing the reflection of myself in the glass. Someone who had been broken, rebuilt, and now simply was.
No masterpiece. No reiki.
Just a man framed by his own survival. And that was enough. The final canvas was never meant to be painted. That was the point. Weeks after the exhibit of empty frames, I found myself standing by the sea, a place I'd never visited with her, untouched by the fingerprints of the past. The horizon stretched endlessly, a perfect metaphor for everything I had left behind.
No beginnings. No endings.
Just the vast, indifferent expanse of moving forward. I carried nothing with me. No letters, no photos, no relics of what was, just myself. A man no longer defined by betrayal, revenge, or even the scars they left. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the sky in hues of gold and crimson, I felt it. Not relief, not triumph, just peace. A quiet acceptance that life isn't about the art we create to cover the pain, but the spaces we allow to remain untouched, honest and raw. I thought of Elena one last time, not with anger or longing, but as a chapter in a story that had already been written. She was just another stroke on a canvas too vast to be defined by a single mark. I picked up a small stone from the shore, smooth and unremarkable, and tossed it into the water. No grand gesture.
No symbolism.
Just a simple act, a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence. And as the ripples faded into the vastness, so did she. No masterpiece needed. No frame required. Just the final stroke. Nothing. And that was everything.